All right. Good day, everybody. Welcome to Expanding the Conversation with Richard and Kofi. Today, on this broadcast, one of the things that Richard and I often do is we always ask ourselves, "Hey, what's on your mind?" And sometimes it's hard when you think about that because there's so much going on, Richard, in the world today that there can be so much, right, to think about. One of the things I try to do, for example, is like the Russia-Ukraine war. I always try to get updates on that. I think we're at day 137. And sometimes it's easy after so many days to sort of lose sight of it, but you forget that these people are fighting every day, and they're people who are sort of in the middle of those battles, right? And so when you say like, what's on your mind, it's like, so many various things. And I know, like even in the U.S., there was a big issue of Roe v. Wade, and as you know, that stirred up a lot of controversy and issues, and started the whole conversation about rights again and women's rights and so on. And then even in Guyana, we've seen issues of like in Haslington with this young man being shot by the police, and issues of fairness and justice, came to the front, and then there was a protest. That a lot of people, I think, felt like, innocent people there in Monrepo or shouldn't have been attacked, and I think most people agree on that, right? For depending, it doesn't matter, I think, where you sit on any particular issue. I think a number of people felt like that shouldn't happen. But there's just so much going on in the world around us every day that any one of these things can be in your mind, even though people might think that they may not hear you talk about it. You may not come on a broadcast like this and articulate your thoughts and so on about this issue. But I am sure, and I'm very sure everybody listening, these things are weighing on their minds, and they're seeing it everywhere, not just the grown-ups, but also young adults and young children, right, are seeing these things, and are having to grapple with these societal issues every day, that affects them in some way, right? That affects them in some way. I mean, I watch even my children come home because these conversations are happening. My son's a teenager now, and these conversations are happening among them. They're among their friends and so forth. So they're having to deal with all of these societal challenges. So one of the things I thought we could talk about on this is what kinds of approaches or solutions, right, exist for us to even start talking about how we solve some of these issues, Richard. Because here's the position I take, right? The position I take is that these are societal challenges that this is our time, and we have to figure out how to navigate them, right? We've got to come up with some sort of solution in terms of how to navigate them. And the internet and social media is filled with people who put their content up there talking about how they think the problem should solve. And to be honest, I don't even think some people are interested in solving some of these issues. I think some people are so invested in making the issues worse because some people seem to benefit from some of these issues. Um, but for me, my position has always been, what can we do to really solve these challenges, right? What solutions do we have? How are we supposed to come to the table and talk about these challenges, whether it's race, whether it's issues of justice, whether it's issues of civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, right? All of these kinds of issues are permeating our social space, and it's like you can't ignore them, right? You can't ignore them. You've got children, you got to sit and talk with your children about some of these issues as well. Um, and recently I've been thinking more about this, and there were some approaches that I, been looking at, right, and some of the pitfalls that people tell you to avoid. And I know one of the pitfalls we have to avoid is this sort of extremism, where I've often see on whether it's Republican or we say liberal conservative position, or whether it's a black or white issue or an Indian or a black issue, I always find that the extremes don't work. I don't know about you, but that's been my observation, that going to the very extreme of the issue doesn't really seem to bring about a real solution. I think those often tend to lead to further division. So the question is, what kinds of approaches do we take? How do we even start to engage on these things whilst trying to think about not making the situation worse at the same time, right? And I think that's an issue. I take, for example, the parent. I think both of the Henry boys had a similar kind of response, right? I think the parents of the Henry boys, and then recently here, Mr. Bacchus, who passed away, who was killed. And I heard his parents sort of advocating on the one hand for justice, right? Whether that is even in protest, right? You people have the right to protest and say, look, something wrong was done, but you could hear him also calling on for civility, right? On the other hand, saying, I want justice, but I don't want to make the situation worse at the same time, right? I don't want to inflame other issues whilst trying to pursue justice. And I imagine that there are philosophical questions that arise from that, as if are these things mutually exclusive? I mean, can you have people protesting and still and not have this, have that spin off into other things that cause problems? Are there ways to achieve this? Are people angry? I mean, when people get an opportunity to protest about one thing, are they really dealing with other issues too that then come to the fore? And then it's not just about that one thing. I've got an opportunity to protest. I'm going to make it about everything that I'm dealing with. What do you think? What do you think's happening here, Rich? Why are we struggling so much to solve and deal with some of these issues, man?
It's one of the things I'll say about these conversations that they're difficult to have
Yeah.
in closed spaces, but even much more difficult to have out in the open. Um, it is. Some of us have sort of solved some of these issues in our personal lives on a smaller scale, right? Because we're all coming from somewhere, right? We've all lived in some sort of system that hasn't necessarily always worked in our favor, and we've had to navigate that, and we found a way around it. And in our situation, for example, you grew up in the country, and but we all went to an educational institution, and I think education certainly seems to be able to, for the most part, help to solve some of it. Meaning that not necessarily you have to go to school, but I think when we try to understand each other, then we're probably less likely to be angry at each other.
Right.
And so the best thing I think we can do is to take our personal or personal life lessons, right? The things that we've learned over time and share them, right? Like how did we end up going? Let's say if we take our education, for example, or even going into a world where we don't feel like it's necessarily that we're always welcome or that our chances of success is equal, right? Because I think some of these things are, as you said, they're an extension of bigger problems, um, and I think we can share some of those experiences and how we navigated it, and what are some of the results. Because I think a lot of people um, have have created extraordinary results, and I've said this I think before in closed forums. In Guyana, for example, there is endless examples of people of all races that have done really well for themselves, right? They have navigated whatever prejudice that existed, whether in the PP time or the old PNC time, right? And they've made a life for themselves. Why aren't we talking about that? Why aren't we talking about how do we get past that despite whatever struggles the system, or whatever limitations the system may put on us, so that we can all enhance our lives so we have a better voice. Um, in terms of, and like I said, this conversation is a hard conversation to have, but in terms of when we see, like in that situation in Guyana where somebody uh, got shot and killed, and there was a protest that erupted, and people were hurt and all kinds of things that happened. It seemed like it was weird observing it from afar because it seemed like they weren't all connected. But
Yeah.
clearly, I think when things happen, as much as they may be uncomfortable, and we think unnecessary, it is important to listen, and to observe, and to maybe ask some questions because, as you said, there are things brewing below the surface, and we can try to sort of walk around them and not say anything much, which we see, right? We see that in the news. Things will pop up, people get all heated and excited, and if the news doesn't cover it for a couple of weeks, we forget about it. And that's not
That's what I was saying, like with the war. Yeah.
yeah, we forget
Yeah.
about it, and that's not a way to solve our problems, right? We'd rather be willing to have regular forums to discuss what are the solutions to the struggles that we face. And without that, I think we're always going to feel. I mean, it's like you're in a marriage, right? And something comes up in the marriage, and you talk about it, or one person doesn't want to talk about it. And then 5 years after, the same conversation comes up. It's like, yeah, remember that time 5 years ago? It's like, but hold on, like, should we not have
Yeah. I thought we moved
spoken
on.
to this, right? And then all of a sudden, you've got this. You've got a problem that can take down the entire institution of marriage, right? And I think that's what we have a lot of times going on in every society. I mean, we see it in the U.S., we see it in Guyana, right? We could be going along a path, and the assumption is everybody's going to do well, and there's an equal chance of success for everyone. And then something happens that could potentially bring it all down, right? At least a significant portion of it. And so we can't sweep things under the rug. We can't ignore people's voice, even if their actions sometimes seems unconnected and unjustified.
Connected. Yeah.
We've got to dig into it, right? Because maybe it is that, as we know, and I think we're partially guilty of this, those that have a well-meaning voice and good intentions sometimes don't say anything, right? Because our lives are fine, right? We're doing okay. We're making do. We've maybe fought our struggles and we've gotten over the hump. But I don't think that's good enough, right? Which is why we're having
Right.
this conversation. As uncomfortable as I think we've got to be willing to say we've got to keep talking about it and working towards a solution. And we need better leaders because if somebody's leading these things, that just makes it worse because it means that somebody that's not intended to bring our societies together, and this is across the world. It's not specific
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
alone,
Exactly.
right?
Somebody's
If
benefiting
somebody's
from
not
it.
intended, yeah, to bring us together, because I think that you rightfully pointed out, Kofi, the extremes are the people that are that are saying things. I wouldn't say they're having a conversation, right? The extremes are pushing messages out there. And there's a significant portion of people in the middle that don't share those extreme views. They love each other, right? They want to see their society do better. They want to see everybody live a good life, but they're quiet, right? They're going about their lives and they're doing the things they need to do and showing love to each other. But when we see when those that maybe feel like, man, I don't hear about those people that are working, that have solved this maybe in their own lives or working towards solving it. I feel like, yeah, maybe these guys on the extreme here, maybe they have a point. Maybe I should join them. Right? And so you step out to your place in the middle, maybe because you're on the edge, right? You're not quite
Yeah.
exalted, but you feel like maybe they're saying something, right? Or you wake up one morning and you feel like I don't like where my life is, or I feel like something has happened to me that I feel is unjust, right? Or you don't get the job you applied for, and you rock it up to race, right? You don't take a deeper look and say maybe I need a little bit more experience. And then the message shows up, right? And so you're enraged already, you're upset, and then you just jump on the bandwagon, right? And you
Yeah.
go through the road. I think that is a bad road because I am a big believer that we've got to focus on our lives and try to
Yeah.
keep making it better for ourselves and everybody else, right? Our family members and everybody else. Um, and so I don't know that I have any any solutions to offer both. I really do. But one of the things I'll say before I shut up here is Um, it is sometimes I think as a society we assume that if our lives aren't affected that it doesn't affect it. Like if we're not directly affected by some of these things, um, it, it, it doesn't affect us, but it does, right? I mean, whether wherever we live, wherever as you said, right? When you look and you see um, people getting killed, or there's upset wherever it is, it hurts, right? It hurts because one, I think we know there's a better way, but two, I mean, like we're humanity, right? And I don't think, at least I'm not, and I know you're not the kind of person who wakes up and think, well, how do we sow more seeds of chaos and division and watch the world go to hell, right? I think for the most part, so it hurts. It hurts because we know that there's a better way. We know that life can be better, and these
Yeah.
things are happening. And oftentimes when we feel like we're making progress, it shows up, right? And it's like, well, I thought we're moving forward, but it's the old saying goes, it feels like we've made one
Yeah.
step forward and two step backward.
I understand the need to um, continue to dialogue about an issue, right? So that you continue to do that. But I think that there is um, a responsibility and the path to continue to discuss and advance an issue without undoing any progress that you've made on the issue, right? And some of these issues are sort of important, right? Um, you've heard people, for example, talk about the Me Too movement, which was important, right? A very important movement that unearthed a lot of uh, powerful men using their power to abuse women, and those women were quiet. And once one or two of them started speaking up, they were able to support each other and share these experiences and start to address these issues. But then what that naturally did was it brought some sort of power, right, um, to a number of women and institutions to be able to speak out and really start to address people like Harvey Weinstein, for example, and certain men who were doing this stuff. But at some point, there were people who were starting to feel like I couldn't call off a woman anymore and be like, hey, I'm interested in you, right? Because for fear that it might be taken as the wrong thing, right? And so if it became too aggressive of a movement, then men became scared and felt like they couldn't like even ask a woman out. Like you're on a job and you feel like you can't even ask a woman out because now you might become part of the Me Too movement, and men don't want that, right? And so there's a balance that has to happen where um, you still want to go after those men who mess up, but you still want good men, right, to feel like no, it's okay. We can interact, and we can, we are opposite sex, and there's a certain way that we do engage, and we can engage respectfully. What you don't want to happen is no engagement between the sexes anymore, right? That's like that would be an extreme outcome for that, right? You would agree. The,
Yeah.
the same thing I've always said about the black and white struggle, like in the United States, for example, where the black people are not empowered, didn't have certain civil rights, and couldn't go into certain restaurants, white onlys and things like that. But when you get to a certain place, I don't know that the goal is to have a place where you are meeting back out, right, to white folk, the same kind of mistreatment that you had, right, when you were in that position. So there's a certain kind of balance that you want to achieve, right? You want to get to a place where there is safety in the society, there's equal rights and justice for everybody, but you don't want that to be turned in a sense where now white people have to be afraid to go to a black community because something's going to happen to your white kid, right? Nobody wants that either, I think, on the other side. So I think even with the race thing, it's like in Ghana, if we've made any progress over the years, the conversation that we're having cannot undo any progress that we have already made, right? It has to it has to protect that progress. It's got to protect any achievements that we've made, right? We shouldn't simply want to undo any gains that we have gathered over the years. And I think that that's something that we have to. I think again, I don't have a specific way to do that, but I think that's at least one of the things that we have to be thinking about, right? Is that we have made gains, right? We do have a society that, in my view, is more integrated than it used to be. I wish that it could be even more integrated, right? And that we can deal with things in a better way. But we don't want to engage this conversation. And I think that's one of the things that makes the conversation so hard, right, Richard? Is that people don't want to say something, and in trying to help the situation, they make the situation worse, right? Like I think that's one of the things that prevent a lot of people from having this conversation. It's almost like you use marriage as a good example. You could have an issue in a marriage, and one of the reasons people refuse to bring it up is because they don't want to cause an issue, right? It's like you'd rather stay quiet, even though you know, right? Even though you know that that isn't solving the problem, but at the back of your head, you're thinking, I don't want to make the problem worse. And so you're in this sort of limbo state, right? And we've talked about suffering in silence, for example, where you just stay quiet because you don't want to make it worse. So I think we encourage speaking up, and we encourage talking about the issue and addressing the issue, but it's got to be done in a way where we don't go overboard, right, to the other side, um, and then just disrupt the balance, right, and undo any gains that we have made. So I think it's important that we approach it, like you said, without really trying to create divisions. Like there are people who talk about, bringing people together, but really what they're doing is dividing, right, and somehow trying to convince people that through this division you're going to get people to come together. I don't see it. I don't see it. I think we've got to set up conversations and interactions in a way that allow us to have the conversation, no doubt. Like, and I think you made a good point where you talk about seeing how people behave and listening, right? So there has to be sort of a listening to people, right? People who might feel like they're being wrong, people who might feel like they don't have the same rights as others, people who feel like they're being marginalized. There has to be a listening ear, but there also has to be sort of a responsibility to say, look, I want to engage in a conversation and not make the situation worse, right? Let's gradually put a block, right, on the building and keep progressing.
Yeah. No, I agree with all those points. And one of the things I think we probably should all agree on is that physical violence, right, hurting somebody, is not good for anybody. It doesn't matter what it is, right?
Right.
If you go out and inflict physical pain on somebody, and I'm not saying that emotional pain and trauma and all that stuff isn't equally as bad, but I think let's maybe start with not inflicting physical pain on each other. And yeah, I think we need well-thinking people in our societies to speak up and share their experiences, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, I really appreciate, and I mean, the bond that we share, I think, is sort of a good representation of how, through sort of a positive interaction, we can walk away, building some deep bonds with each other, even though we may come from different worlds, right?
Different. Yeah,
And we
absolutely.
may see that there are struggles that are out there, and so you know, I think we just have to keep working towards um, just coming together, right? And not inflicting pain on each other, but have the conversation.
Right.
One of the things that you talk about there is recognizing how far we've come, and I think sometimes we take for granted how far we've come. And one of the things I think I was reading in the book recently is about um, how much our ancestors, or the people that have been before us, how much they'd actually figured out how to live in societies, and how much they learned over time as they live. But a lot of times, as we know, that message doesn't get passed on. Right? The stories don't get told. They certainly don't get written, and so we've got to maybe start doing some of that. You know, as somebody that grew up in Guyana, in so-called Guyana home. I mean, we live as such. When you think about a religion, a society with so many different religions, right? Practicing religions of large majorities, right? It's not necessarily a predominantly Christian society or a predominantly Hindu society, right, or Muslim society. It's everybody, and we found a way to embrace that, right? And live in harmony and find a way to make that work. And that's a huge accomplishment. Right? It
I
certainly
agree.
was always that way, right? I mean, I was watching a Marvel show there where they talk about the story, and I don't know all of it, but the division between Pakistan and India, right, and the Muslims and the Hindus, and
Yeah, Miss
you
Marvel.
know, right, and so we have overcome that to a large extent. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't have work to do, but we don't fight those battles, right, and so we're certainly much more connected than I think we are divided. But we've got to be reminded of how far we've come, so that and how far we've come in a positive way, right? Because I know there's some negative stories, right? That will bring up the old stories and say, well, these
Yeah,
things
yeah,
will
absolutely.
change. I'm not saying don't tell those stories, but maybe tell those stories in the context of how far we've come and where we are today, and the fact that we don't fight those same battles, and remember it, and continue to build on that at least. And I think we'll get to a better place.
Yeah,
But yeah, maybe I think we have to continue the conversation. There's
yeah,
no
I
easy
agree.
solution.
I agree with you. I think the point you made, just in closing on religion, I wanted to make that point too, is I know that there are religions who disagree with each other, right? There are people who disagree with some of the positions that maybe Christians might take, a Hindu or Muslims might take, and so forth. We get that. That exists in our society. But what you don't see is you don't really see religious war sort of in our society, right? We have somehow in our religious communities, even among people who don't, atheists or agnostics or whatever, right? We have found that they, for the most part, live in harmony, right? There's a good level of coexistence, right? That's happening, so people can worship freely. You don't have people going into churches and doing things. There's sort of a respect for everybody's sort of right to practice their religion and so on. Um, Maybe there's some lessons certainly to learn there about how we could get to this kind of equilibrium and advance it, right? And take lessons from how we have achieved that into other areas, of society, right? To create the same kind of harmony for our own existence. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is we should call out our religious leaders to be part of the solution. I agree.
Yeah. And they should be teaching us. I mean, no, I mean, in some ways, you're
No,
right.
yeah, I agree
What
with
what
you.
brought us to that place?
Yep,
Why is it
yep.
they're not, protesting outside of, why are Christians not protesting outside of masjids and Hindu temples? Hindus are not protesting outside of masjids and churches, and Muslims are not protesting outside of, temples and churches, right? So there is some sort of respect and good sort of, living that's happening there, a really good sort of balance, right? And there's probably something to learn from that experience,
Yeah,
overall about how we can solve other issues in society, whether that leads to a complete co-integration or some sort of coexistence that respectfully says, look, man, let's agree to disagree, and that's you, that's me, and that's fine. We respect each other, and we live happily. That's it, you know.
yeah. And one thing I'll say before I close, because I remember seeing when this whole thing was happening in Ghana, people go on TikTok, and I didn't realize that we did that much in Ghana. So that was new for me. I'm not on TikTok, so I'm not hip like that. But I saw it. Maybe in the same way when people sow these words on social media of division, um, maybe those of us that have a word of that has experience or have personal experiences where we're coming together. We should step up and share that as well, right? And say, I mean,
Yeah,
like I said, like you and I, you were like a brother to me, and I appreciate that. I can't imagine um, my life without you in a positive way. So I appreciate that, and I've lived that
yeah,
experience, right? And so in the same way, so I'm throwing that out there as a positive experience across races, right? And so it's not. I think we have to keep doing that too, right? If you're with a group of people and you go to an Eid celebration, because I know Eid was
Yes.
just right? And so
Mhm.
I remember going to Eid celebrations, and I was a Hindu vegetarian at the time. I moved on from that place, but at the time I was a vegetarian. And I showed up at an Eid celebration at my friend's house, and there was vegetarian food for me, right? And so um, it's like there's so much love and respect there, right?
Yeah, imagine that, right?
Yeah, I mean, and we have friends across all races, right? And so we know for sure that exists, and so we're not living in a divided world as we are. So those that have created unity in their personal experiences and across multiple races, let's go out and share that, right? Let's broadcast it, um, or as they say in church, right? Let's testify to overcoming that hurdle.
Yeah,
And not to say that we shut the voices down, because that's not what we're trying to do by any means. But I think we're trying to
no,
balance it out so that people don't lose
exactly,
hope,
exactly.
right? Yeah, that
Yeah, the
overwhelm.
conversations can't be on the extreme all the time.
Yes, let's bring the rest of the people into the conversation. So
Exactly.
I'll end with that. I mean, like I said, it hurts. It hurts to see our fellow human beings suffer and go through
Yeah.
these kinds of experiences.
All right, man. Well, guys, thanks for being part of this conversation. Like I said, it's not an easy conversation to have. Usually, when people have these conversations, there's just so much anger and frustration that exists. When these conversations do come up, but we do appreciate people taking time to listen to our perspective, and putting our voice into it. Again, there's so much going on in society, and we've got to find a way to deal with this, right, and deal with all of it. So we appreciate you listening to us. Guys, take care.
Everybody.
Bye.